Okay, we've got some wild meat in the freezer. We've had a successful fall, and I'm gonna show you how to use some ground meat, and we're making wild venison meatball subs. Now when we harvest a wild animal, there's always some meat that we use for steaks and roasts and all that fun stuff, but there's always a pile for ground meat as well, and I'm gonna show you how to use ground meat from really any animal and to make a really good meatball. A meatball is a great way to use some ground meat, so I'm gonna show you how to make an awesome meatball that'll be good for a whole bunch of different things. Venison goes in the bowl, and I'll just season this with some salt and pepper. I'm gonna put half of my diced onion in the bowl, crushed garlic. Here goes a little bit of breadcrumb. Crack that egg. Just a little shot of cream or milk to wet those breadcrumbs. Chopped parsley. Parsley in. So what we're doing here is, because most wild meat is really lean and most of that ground meat that we have is really lean, we're just adding some flavoring here and a little bit of moisture into that meat, plus something that'll bind it together. Lots of the time that lean meat will break apart when you make a meatball, so we're adding the breadcrumbs and the egg just to help keep everything together. So the meat's all mixed up right now, and I'm gonna get to forming my meatballs. As I'm doing that, I'm just heating up my pan on the stove, and with this recipe, the pan is going into the oven for a few minutes once we're done searing off the meatballs. So we wanna make sure that we're using a pan that's either a cast iron pan or a steel pan with a metal handle. Make sure you don't use something with a plastic handle because it's going into the oven and it's gonna need to come out. So something I like to make sure when I'm forming my meatballs is A, try to make them as uniform as possible, and B, when you're forming them in your hands, just go really lightly when you're forming the ball. You don't need to compress everything. If you want a really nice tender meatball, just sort of gently rub everything together to form that ball. If you just squeeze it, you'll get a really dense meatball, which is totally fine, and it's kind of a preference thing, but yeah, I like to just make sure that I put them together really lightly. All right, so my pan is hot now. I'm going to add some oil to it, and then I'll just take my meatballs, sear them in there nice and hot. What I'm doing is I'm getting some color on them. I don't need to cook them all the way through, and once they're done getting a bit of color, they'll cook through a little bit. I'm gonna take them off, and then I'll add a little more oil to the pan, saute my onions, and then we'll start making the sauce. Here we go, meatball. Oh yeah, that's what you're looking for, that nice brown color. And what that does is it just kind of helps seal everything in and hold everything together, but it's gonna add a really nice flavor and texture to every bite that you take. The color on these is looking amazing. They're nice and brown, and I'm gonna take them off and just let them rest on this cutting board for a few minutes. So now I'm gonna move pretty quickly. I've got all these amazing little meat chunks and meat juices and stuff in the pan. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more oil and then take the other half of my chopped onion and just throw that right in the hot oil, and we'll cook down these onions until they're nice and soft. So the next stage here is we've got our meatballs chilling. We've got our onions, they've softened up in the pan, and we're just gonna take a tomato sauce. You can buy any jarred or canned tomato sauce. This can go straight into the pan. So something I like to do with my tomato sauce as well is just to give it that extra little zangy kind of punch to it, is add some balsamic vinegar. You don't have to add a lot, but it adds that sweet kind of hit to it. So I'm just gonna add a couple of tablespoons to the whole batch here and incorporate it in, and that'll be that. Now, I've got fresh oregano. You can use dried as well, but just put it in there. It's something that I'm telling you to do. Right now, the meatballs are going back into that tomato sauce, into that pan. All right, so one at a time, here we go. Little tomato bath for our meatball friends. Our meatballs are in their little tomato bath. They're going in the oven. It's set at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and we'll toss them in there for about 10 to 15 minutes. Oh man, do they ever look good. I'm just gonna set them right here. The next step here is I'm going to grab my buns, and I'm just gonna give them a nice little cut. We're going to take these beautiful meatballs and some sauce and start laying them inside of our buns. I've got some basil here, so I'm just gonna tear up a little bit of basil. You can add as much or as little basil as you like. And now we'll just dress the top of these things with a little mozzarella cheese. So we don't want to burn these buns or burn the cheese. We're just getting them under the broiler to make sure everything melts. So keep an eye on the oven, get it under the broiler on low, and just leave it in there for a minute or two. These things smell ready. I'm gonna pull them out. They've been in there for a couple of minutes. Oh my gosh. Got a nice little plate here. It's a perfect meal for 2 hungry people. So the finishing move here again is if you have torn basil on top, it'll add an amazing flavor and aroma to this. And there we have it, our venison meatball subs. This is just a super cool way and a different way to enjoy that ground meat and get yourself some beautiful meatball subs. For more information on these wild venison meatball subs, click the blog post link below.